Paul, welcome. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. And it's great to be in Brooklyn, I'll tell you that.
We love having you here. The last time we saw you was Revitalized in September. It's been too long. You wowed the crowd.
Well, I was wowed by the crowd. What an extraordinary curated group of people that was.
Well, thank you so much. I know you made the event for a lot of people and such an important time in our world with regards to climate change. So it was an honor to have you there. And I know everyone appreciated you. So once again, I'll say that.
Thank you so much. I felt so welcomed.
Well, let's go back to early days of Paul Hawken, before Drawdown and bestselling. I don't even know how many times you've been best-selling author and so many awards. The CV is extensive. We will save that for later. Let's go back to, I think a lot of people don't know that you were one of the founders from Erewhon.
I was the founder.
The founder of Erewhon, which is like the place to go in LA where all the natural food trends start. So talk to us about that.
Sure. It started really with when I was 6 months old.
Wow, early entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I was the youngest diagnosed case of asthma in San Mateo County at that time. And I had asthma all my life, and chronically. Thankfully, it was before nebulizers and, hormonal treatment, steroids, but I had to take aminophylline and ephedrine every day in some form or manner. And I read a book on macrobiotics when I was 20, and
this is a long time ago.
And it said, basically, if you're sick, it's your fault. And it kind of pissed me off, because I was born with it. But there was such truth in it that I couldn't shake loose from. And so I went on a 10-day rice diet.
10-day rice?
Yep, 10 days rice.
Brown rice, white rice?
Brown rice and tea. And classic. And my asthma went away. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. I've been taking pills and going to, pharma and doctors for all these years. And it went away this easily. And I was like, I didn't know what to be angry at, the medical establishment or the fact that this had been kept from me in the sense,
right.
This information, they say asthma to this day is not curable, So for a year, what I did is I went back and forth. In other words, I would add foods, eat this, and just see how I felt in my lungs and overall, did the asthma come back? And sure enough, beer would do it really well. Wine would do even better. And I just went back and forth, because if you actually have a very rarefied diet, then when you add something to it, you can detect the variable. And that's what I kept doing. And finally, I convinced myself is like food was amazing in what it could do. And if I figured out with all my stubbornness, I figured other people figure it out too. And I went to Boston, and there was this sort of food co-op, really, which in the basement of a apartment building on Newbury Street that was selling rice and oats and oil and soy sauce and just, very, very limited amount of foods. And I took it over because nobody wanted to do it. It was like doing $25 a day. And I thought I can just sit in there and read books, and, when somebody comes in, I can take care of them. And somebody came in one day and said, how do you know your oil is cold pressed? I sold Hain oil. It said cold pressed. I said, because it says so right there. And then the same day, coincidentally, somebody said, how do you know your oats are organic? And I said, well, because it says so, And they left, and I realized that I didn't know. That is, I was just assuming that it was true because it was on the label. So I wrote to Hain, and they wrote back and said, there really aren't any cold pressed oils anymore. Cold pressed means cold processed, which means we take solvent extracted oils and reduce the temperature to 34 degrees and filter off the stearates, which make the oil cloudy, so the oils are clear, And I was so personally affronted by this, to think that I was misrepresenting products to the few customers I had. And the same day, again, coincidentally, there was a delivery of the organic oats from the Mennonites in Pennsylvania. And I was taking this big bag of oats off the truck, and it said National Oat Company, Des Moines, Iowa. And I thought, And so after I unloaded it and put it in the store, I called up the National Oak Company in Iowa and said, tell me about your organic program. They said, what is that? What are you talking about? I said, well, organically grown. And said, we don't know what you're talking about. And I said, we just have one oat and we sell it and we get from this and that and so forth. And they knew nothing about it. So it was just relabeled by, frankly,
Mennonites.
Mennonites, yeah. People you think, if there's anybody you could trust.
High integrity, yeah.
No question, in God we trust. And that made me so, then I decided if I was going to be in the food business, I was going to replace every single thing in the store from a source that I knew, understood. I knew the farmer, it was direct, and I would make it transparent to the customer. In other words, so you didn't have to trust us because it would have the name of the farmer, how it was grown, the soil type, everything, so that we remove that, in a sense, that wall of presentation that still exists to this day. And that is how Erewhon got started. And I then, called it Erewhon Trading Company because we were doing a lot of business with Japan, and that's what they called themselves, trading companies. And off it went.
And we're like 50 years later. Some time has passed since you. It's still going, still strong, probably stronger than ever.
Yeah, we opened the store in LA in, I think it was 1969.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 47, 48 years ago. Wow.
Yeah, and on Beverly Boulevard. And even then, we had a lot of celebrities and movie stars and models and so forth. Which, I mean, if you want to go see, the beautiful people in LA, go to the Erewhon store on Venice Boulevard. I mean, it's unbelievable. But the DNA of Erewhon, which I love about who owns it now, because the store in LA was bought by Tom DeSilva, who actually started out as our janitor. I mean, but
really?
He's extraordinary, intelligent man, though. He just started that way.
I love stories like that. People start from the bottom and work themselves up.
Well, he really wasn't. I mean, he was an ex-lawyer, and so I mean, he
started as a janitor, though.
Yeah,
I give him credit.
Lots of credit. And he sold it, and later the people who own it now. What I love about it is that DNA from that from the beginning is quality, 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 and no compromise in terms of that. And that's what Erewhon does to this day. And I'm so grateful to the new owners, whom I don't know, by the way, for their commitment to that. But that's its origin, is actually the misrepresentation of products back in 1967.
Sure. We still have some work to do there.
Yeah, we do.
We're getting better, but it's still some work. And so but people may not also know Smith and Hawken. So how did that happen?
Well, that happened when I was on the board of Ecology Action in Palo Alto, and we taught basically biodynamic, intensive gardening, mostly to people in the developing world, because there is a big vitamin A deficiency. And so we taught a methodology of growing greens, in a very small, compact space. In order to affect nutrition. If you lack vitamin A during gestation, during pregnancy, it really affects the brain. And so it was really about, helping children have a higher IQ, fundamentally, And we used tools to do that. And they were made in England, and they were fork and spade. I mean, pretty straightforward stuff. And the distributor of those tools was in Ohio, and there was a flood of the Ohio River, and all the tools got basically flooded. And the company sold them anyway, but they were rusted from the inside out, and the tools broke, and it was a bad deal, and they went out of business. So I was on the board, and I said, well, I used to do import-export at Erewhon from overseas. I know that, I know how to do that. And so I'll import them directly. And John Jevons, who was the head of Ecology Action, the founder, at some point said, I don't feel comfortable being in business. And I had already lent the money for a container full of these tools to be purchased. And it was on the water, the tools. And they were coming to Palo Alto. And John Jevons at Ecology Action said, we really don't want to be in the tool business. We want to buy the tools, for sure, but we don't want to be in the business. And so I thought, I was kind of upset actually. And I spent about 2 hours in the bathtub and, just thinking about this going, oh my gosh, I don't want a container full of tools. And then I decided to start a company. And I was going to call it Fundamental Tools. And then a friend of mine, Dave Smith, who ran the Briar Patch Co-op, said, come on, let's go start this, And I actually had already started, but renamed it Smith and Hawken. And he was Smith, I was Hawken. And it just sounded good, like.
It did sound good.
Yeah, Black and Decker, Smith and Wesson, these old-fashioned names, And even to this day, people say, wow, it's like the old company had been around forever. It had not been. And that's how Smith and Hawken started.
And so something else in the early days of Paul Hawken I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about was Martin Luther King.
Yeah, well, it was Selma, Alabama, and the March on Montgomery. And I went down there with a number of people from the Bay Area. And at the very outset of before the march, as you might remember from your history, what happened is that these kids, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, from high school, started it really and went to march, to Montgomery, and they got stopped at the Pettus Bridge, in Selma by the sheriff and using truncheons and German shepherds and horses. And it was horrible. And then other people joined, from the outside, and finally Martin Luther King joined, and it just kept escalating. And all they were trying to do is to march to Montgomery.
Sure.
And finally the Justice Department intervened, John Doerr and so forth. But I came at that time, and I became the press coordinator, which is by default, really. It wasn't like I had a resume. People did what they could do. And you registered the press then in order to make sure that they were alive.
Sure.
It's, to track people, there was no other reason, really. We want to know who was there and are they okay? And so I even got to be a spokesperson, which probably wasn't a good idea, but on radio, and people call in radio shows and stuff like that. But and so, I had a bird's eye view, and Jesse Jackson.
Did you get to spend time with him? Okay.
Well, I got to be in his presence.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say.
What was that like?
He was a very inward person, actually. He was very eloquent, of course. Many of his famous phrases, actually, you can trace them back to the Dhammapada in Buddhism and others. He was very. He read a lot. He was very eclectic that way. But everybody actually there at the church where there was classic, Baptist preaching going on every night, and even in the afternoons were very eloquent. They, call and response. It was just so beautiful to be a white kid and basically a black church, and just, the spirit was not a noun, it was a verb. And, it was so enlivening and alive in people's sense of the Holy Spirit was palpable, and the relationship between King and others, and the parishioners, and then really outsiders who'd come in, was really electric, and it was just a stunning time. And it's also dangerous,
Yep.
There was a Unitarian minister that came in, I think from Canada, if I might remember correctly, who got killed, and just got beaten to death, and just because he, in his naivete, walked into town. And at that time, which is hard to understand because it was mostly white people. I think the majority of the population in Selma was white, maybe still to this day, I don't know. But the white people in Selma, in Alabama, could see a civil rights worker who was white a block away.
Mm-hmm.
They could just spot it. They knew you were not one of them, that you were one of those. And the hostility and the hate. And for me, it was really, this sounds odd, but it was a really great experience to see hate up front and close and personal. Because now when I read about the world and the atrocities that are going on right this minute in Yemen, in Syria,
and here in our backyard.
Well, yeah, here in our backyard, but I mean, I feel like I can understand it in a way that is not abstract.
Right.
I've seen a populace be so full of hate coming from believing thoughts that were basically borrowed from other people, that have no basis in reality at all, nothing. And yet they become, in a sense, the matrix of extraordinarily harmful actions to their self and others.
Sure.
So I saw that, and it was really helpful. And I remember when we did march into Montgomery. I mean, it was so stunning because it was nobody there. It was like a ghost town, complete ghost town. There was nobody on the streets, nothing, and you could hear us, marching in from the high school, which we had encamped at the night before. And every so often you see a shade or a curtain pull back, at a house, people peeking, but not like just looking out the window. They wouldn't do that. There was something going on. Like there was so much either repulsion or fear. It depends on the person looking. Again, it was one of those moments that, you knew it was historic, but you didn't know how historic it would be.
So I want to come back to that. I want to segue to, we're painting the picture of the many shades of Paul Hawken. So we've got activist Paul Hawken, we've got entrepreneurial Paul Hawken. You're also a prolific author, an environmentalist. So talk to me now. When did you start writing? Tell me about that first book. And people know Ecology of Commerce, Natural Capitalism, now Drawdown, which everyone absolute must read. Everyone just stop listening to the podcast, right? Well, listen to the podcast, but go buy the book, Drawdown. Let's get to writing Paul Hawken and when it started to get, when you really started to embrace environmentalism.
Twofold. One, when I was a child or young, my father was a member of the Sierra Club. And when I was 10 years old, I met David Brower. Now,
who's David Brower?
He was the founder, basically, of Friends of the Earth. And he was the one who transformed Sierra Club from a kind of climbing club and hiking club. And, John Muir founded the Sierra Club. So, but he was the one who really changed it into a large membership organization that was also politically active. And kicked ass basically, and it still does. And I met him, and there was this towering figure, and it just stayed with me. And also, what stayed with me is that we were so imbued with the idea that of nature, of pristine nature. The way you camped, you could not. No trace, just all these sort of principles of how you be in nature and then leave it. And I remember going to Yosemite again later, and there was an RV, like an RV there, and the person had a lawn chair, and somehow they actually had a TV going with antenna and, being plugged into a generator on the RV. And I was gobsmacked. I was like,
what's the point of being in
Yosemite? I was like, and I said, my dad, why did they let them in? How could you come into a national park with an RV and a TV and a generator? It was just so startling to me at that time, the sort of the idea that nature is a place where you could actually bring in what this person thought of as civilization and camp, in the wilderness. And, so I remember that, but then when I had the experience with asthma and then food and then Erewhon, and then I got into food seriously in terms of sourcing. And that's when I learned a lot about organic farming. And my grandfather was a farmer, so I grew up for many years on a farm, but never thought of it. I think he was organic by default, but not in a sense by intention. And I spent a lot of time creating sources, finding sources, finding farmers who were organic, converting farmers to organics for Erewhon. we became a fairly large company with 3,000 accounts and, wholesaling around the country. And I learned a lot about the environment from being out there on fields and farms. And I remember once in Louisiana, working with a farmer who grew long grain organic rice for us. And we were driving along and I saw this dead pelican.
Mm.
And just like in the rice fields, like, well, and I asked him why, what killed the pelican? He said, oh, that's, in a really thick, sort of Cajun accent, said, oh, it ate the rice seeds. I said, what do you mean it ate the rice seeds? He said, oh, they're covered with captan, it's mercury. It's like, it's a fungicide. It's like, you're kidding. He said, no, it kills them. Like, he didn't do that. That's what he did with he didn't plant those seeds, but it was matter of fact,
Sure.
And that connection, or you could say disconnection, but that connection between food and water and life and, it's so
Sure.
searing. And it just doubled down really on my commitment to finding sources that were not just clean, which is more like selfish, narcissistic, like I want clean food. Of course, everybody does, but actually clean all the way through, so that it was integrated into a system of agriculture that was respectful and honoring of all life.
It's funny for me, it reminded me as a child, the one thing I still hate, it kills me to this day, walking on a beach and seeing trash is like, I like find it disgusting. I just hate it. Yeah. Like this idea of being barefoot and like, I just hate, and in nature in general, it's like, there's something about it which just like kills me.
Flotsam and jetsam.
Yeah. Like the cigarette butts and the plastic. And I've seen photos of, it's like they've got that plastic, it's like a disposable center. And I think it's in Bali or Indonesia somewhere where it's like where all the, it's just like, oh, it's just, that's what kills me.
Yeah.
And so when did you start to write about this stuff?
I started to write about it in my 20s for the East-West Journal, actually, and which is published in my warehouse, as a tenant in South Boston. So, I knew the editor and the people, and I started to write columns or essays about the environment. And it never stopped, really, after that.
And so when you're going, like, how would you, just on a personal level, would you say, like, I want to, because there's entrepreneurial Paul Hawken, and then there's and you do both so well. How did you manage that? And when did you decide, like, all right, I just need to write, I'm dedicating my life and Drawdown? And
in some ways, I wish I kind of had, actually. I feel like, business has been a teaching experience, and I feel like it keeps a foot into the real world of both creation and destruction, because business does both very well. So that has been a touchstone in that sense and it even goes to Drawdown, which is, we can talk about it, but when we mapped and measured and modeled these solutions to reversing global warming, we did the economic analysis as well. We did not just do the greenhouse gas analysis. And so in a sense, that background really came to the fore there as well, which is to know that was relevant and important in terms of communication to people, policymakers, business people, everyone. But I think I just couldn't imagine doing one thing. I think if I had just stuck with one thing, I'd probably be very wealthy right now. But I wasn't interested in money, actually.
Well, do you think, I'm curious about the inspiration as you talk about business, you're also known two books that a lot of entrepreneurs have on their must-read list: Natural Capitalism, Ecology of Commerce. So
and growing a business too.
Yeah. So like, were those books inspiration? We're like, okay, like I'm an entrepreneur, like these are the things entrepreneurs build businesses. If they've got these tools, maybe we can what was your thinking of, like, what do you want to accomplish with those books?
Well, the College of Commerce came out when I was at Smith Hawken, and as we grew a lot.
Yes.
We're up to, when we counted foreign sales, $100 million. And I couldn't help but notice, the throughput that is boxes and, our footprint as it's called now. We didn't use that term then, and even at the time I did analysis, like, is this better to ship stuff to people, or is it better for them to get in the car and go to the store and buy it? And it was quite surprising. It was much better actually to ship and to have people stay home and have it delivered to them than for them to get in the car and go out. But we're just looking at our footprint. And then I got that award. I got this award from...
Which award? You've gotten a lot of awards.
Not so many really, but Council on Economic Priorities. And I was a finalist, and there was 5 finalists, and went to New York, and George Plimpton was the MC, and at the Waldorf Astoria, and I was there. And I did not expect to get the award, but was happy to be there. And
just like Revitalize.
Yeah, just like Revitalize.
The Avocado Award.
Yeah, the Avocado Award. The Avocado Award is so pretty. The CEP award, I don't know where it is to this day. But when I was announced, I was like the winner, and I was thinking, when I went to the microphone, George Plimpton was standing next to me. It wasn't a long talk, and I said that I don't really deserve this award. No one deserves it. That if you take the best practices of the best business, if we're it, fine, but I named others, and the whole world did it, we'd still be going right over the cliff in terms of the environment.
Wow.
And it was just sort of a point of sobriety, it's just like, let's not get too far ahead of our skis on this one, in terms of self-congratulations. And thank you. And I didn't want to be ungracious, but at the same time, I was wanting to be truthful. And so that's really the source of Ecology of Commerce, which is I wanted to write about 2 things, 2 words at that time, which were anathema in terms of other people's perception. They didn't go together at all. And is there one? Was there one? Could business be an ecological organism on the planet as opposed to a destructive one? Mm. And I remember when the book came out, because the prior books, The Next Economy and Growing Business, had been thoroughly reviewed by every business magazine, newspaper in the United States and elsewhere. And the Ecology of Commerce came out, and those books that were bestsellers. So Ecology of Commerce came out, and there was only 1 review by the business press. Reviews were written at Dunn's and Forbes and Business Week, and they were killed by the editors. The reviewers told me, my editor killed it, my editor killed it, my editor killed it. Because in that book it said, business is destroying the world, nobody does it better. And but then I also said that it has the people, the intelligence, the wherewithal, the capital to do the opposite, but that they didn't get that part. And so that book, although it became a bestseller, was absolutely a pariah book. And
sometimes that's a good vehicle to be a bestseller.
I mean, the environmentalists went after me, NRDC.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Why don't the environmentalists like you?
Business is the problem. And then the business people went after it and said, the environmentalists are the problem. They both were, had this war against each other at that time. And I was saying, well, exactly, that's my point, And so let's sit down and have lunch, and see if we can imagine a system of commerce, which is ancient and sacred. Commerce is a good thing, but one that actually is restorative as opposed to generative. And so, yeah, it was an interesting experience to have all those reviews, and then to have, there's Michael Pilecki at the Dallas Times.
Dallas Morning News.
Which is San Jose Mercury, and there's a Minneapolis paper. There's 3 papers. He reviewed it favorably. Great.
It's funny you remember that.
Yeah, I do. That's the only review I got. Well, the only good review, NRDC trashed it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when did you decide in this process to go all in on climate change and the inspiration for Project Drawdown, and how did that work?
Well, when I wrote Ecology of Commerce and Natural Capitalism, which I co-authored with Amory Levins, I mean, both books, I was certainly aware of climate change, but I also thought that, people were doing a pretty good job and understood it very well, a lot better than me. And certainly with the College of Commerce, I mean, there was Bill McKibben and Al Gore's books, 1989 and 1992, The End of Nature and Earth in the Balance, and really extraordinary books, both bestsellers, extremely well written and well researched. And so for me, I felt like, well, this is well in hand.
These guys got it.
These guys got it.
I don't need to be involved.
They nail it. And I just have to keep referring to it so that people know that I'm not oblivious to it, but really speaking to broader issues. If now I don't think there is a broader issue in hindsight, but and it really wasn't until 2001 actually where, I mean, Natural Capitalism had come out in 99, but 2001 I was reading the third assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And
where does one find that? The third
online. Nobody actually, I don't think anybody except a copy editor reads the full report, but there is
and Paul Hawken.
No, I read the summary.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and it was worse than the first and the second assessment, and because the IPCC is consensus science, of which there's no such thing. Science is evidentiary, not consensus. You don't compromise, in science, and consensus is a compromise. But anyway, that being said, what was clear to me is that, I wanted to know, where do we stand? In other words, is there a way out? Can we start naming the goal? Because the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, studies impact. And so when you read it, you get the impact that's happening now, the impact that is being predicted based on good science. And, but you don't really get what to do from it, even though there's called a third working group that's about solutions. And, but those are unreadable papers, unreadable. The last one was 2,000 pages, 2,000 pages. And it had maybe 1/5 of the solutions we have in Drawdown, and even then, just like, I don't know, again, anybody here read it and certainly looked through it. But so I just want to know where we stood and was there a way out? And also wanted to name the goal, because even then, and even now, I should say, then and even now, people talking about reduction, slowing, mitigation, curbing, using these words. And I'm going, curbing, mitigating. It's like, do you even know what that means, mitigation? Mitigation means to reduce the pain and seriousness of something. That's what it means. Look it up, everybody. And we're saying, well, we're going to mitigate climate change. Mitigate? Why would we want to reduce the pain of it? Why do we want to reverse global warming? Why don't we want to stop, at some point, and go back the other way from whence we came? And so I wanted to name the goal, and I talked about it, and I talked to NGOs, big ones, about doing a study, very much what Drawdown eventually did, and identifying the solutions that were at hand, that we knew how to do, we could do, we understood them, and scale them over 30 years to see if we could achieve that point in time when greenhouse gases peaked and went down on a year-to-year basis. I mean, that's what Drawdown means. And everybody said, we don't have the expertise. And they said, well, you should do it. And I said, I don't have the expertise. And so it kind of left it in limbo. And it really wasn't until Bill McKibben's piece in 2014, I think, in Rolling Stone, July, where he wrote a piece called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And that was based on the work of Mark Campanelli at Carbon Tracker in London, who was a financial analyst who went into the nonprofit side and analyzed the balance sheets of every coal, gas, and oil company in the world. And the balance sheet is their assets, and these assets were the coal, gas, and oil in the ground,
right,
and the reserves, as they're called, and basically said these are unburnable. We burn them, we're Venus. We won't even be around if we burn them because of the destruction that would be caused by warming. What Bill did in his piece, and Mark has said, basically Bill McKibben made poetry out of his data in that piece, but what Bill did is burn them. And just look at this one, folks. And it was properly titled Global Warming's Terrifying New Math, and people were terrified. And I had activist friends who said, game over. at that point. Said we've lost. It's game over. It's baked. We're
Done. Yeah.
goners. And I thought, really? And I also felt like sometimes when we surrender, I mean that's game over is a surrender, right? That actually it's game on in a different way. It's an opening, and I think people have had that. Many people in their own life, where they just have gone down the wrong path, and finally they just say, "This is not working for anybody, especially me," and they surrender. And
capitulation.
And then they have it's kind of a spiritual, point of realization and breakthrough. So that's when I decided, without expertise, to start Project Drawdown and do what I had been proposing to be done for, at that time, 13 years.
Explain to people what that is, what Project Drawdown is and what the goal was and is.
Yeah, the goal is to see if we could achieve Drawdown. The methodology was to map, measure, and model.
So reverse climate change, not mitigate it, not stop it, not put it on pause, reverse.
Reverse it. And the methodology is to map, measure, and model the 100, identify, but the 100 most substantive solutions to global warming. Never been done.
And what I love is the subtitle of the book.
The subtitle is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming.
And why is it the most comprehensive plan, Paul? I love this.
Well, the backstory is that was actually not meant for the cover. It was meant for the back cover. And it was written by an intern at Stanford who was working at Penguin that summer. And my editor sent it to me, and what do you think about this for the back cover? And I said, that's ridiculous. And I said, we're not a plan, and we never said we were, and how brash, and blah, blah, blah. And I left it on my desk, so I kind of was struck by it, because it was so, it's bold. And I decided that I have to find who this person was.
Maybe she's listening.
Yeah, I hope so. And I decided that was right. It is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, because no one's ever proposed a plan. So I thought,
I love that. No one's ever proposed a plan. So you know what? It's the most comprehensive.
It could be most literate, most nuanced, most brilliant. You could say whatever you want, because
all of the above
is the first. But the plan part, though, what I came to understand about it is that it is a plan, but it's not our plan. In other words, it's not Project Drawdown's plan. What we did is went out into the world and identified these solutions. Now, bear in mind, these are all solutions that are extant, in place, at hand, practiced, and scaling. That is, these aren't solutions like we could, shoulda, would.
These are real. You mapped out 100. You put the costs, the implicate. Like, these are real. You didn't just make this up and hire a financial analyst. Plug some numbers in.
No.
Let's see what happens.
No, this wasn't like a scenario. This is reality. People say it's so hopeful or it's so optimistic. I said, no, it's not. It's a reality project. What we did on these solutions is identify them, all the impacts in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of greenhouse gases. There's only two things you can do: stop putting them up there or bring them back home by sequestering. There's only two things you can do. But all the data on the carbon side was from peer-reviewed science, and on the conservative side, all the economic data on these solutions came from the IEA, World Bank, FAO, IPCC. None of it came from us. None of the data in Drawdown is from us. We are reflecting back to the world what it is doing, what it knows, and what it costs, and the profits or losses attendant thereon. So in a sense, it's a we talking to a we, because to do this, we didn't have the money to hire huge staff of researchers and scientists, and we put the call out all over the world for Drawdown fellows, and we got inundated with applications from some of the finest people in the world, really, usually in their 20s and 30s, postdocs, half are PhDs, almost half women, 22 countries, 6 continents, just an extraordinary group of people. And they became the core researchers. And to that, we added 120 plus advisors who were activists, politicians, botanists, engineers, scientists, IPCC lead authors, to give us advice on the content. And to that, we added another 40 some odd outside scientific expert reviewers to review the models that we used and employed. And so we wanted to make sure that the data was pretty much impeccable. In other words, it was airtight. And I am, knock on wood, but after 8 months in publication, no scientist has come back to us with a gotcha and said, got that wrong.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and science is a gotcha community.
And so, yeah. And so when I first read the book, and it's a great book, you can't get look, I'm all for Kindle, but you need the physical book because you need to thumb through it. The solutions are ranked from 1 to 100, but they're not in order. And there's just like things that blow you away. So one of the couple things blew me away when I picked it up. One, everyone thinks hybrids, Tesla, they're going to solve it. It's really not that high in the list.
Mm-mm. No, the methodology we used to model the solutions was without bias. I mean, that was the whole point, is to map, measure, and model. And it's transparent and open, our methodology. I mean, it's not hidden, it's not behind a paywall. And we were very surprised at the ranking or the outcome, as surprised as anyone could be. If we had, in a sense, and we did actually, said, well, write down which you think are going to be the top 5 or top, solutions, we would have got it wrong.
What would you have guessed?
Oh, solar, wind. And we would have definitely talk about transport, which is electric vehicles, EVs. Definitely talk about, stop cutting trees, and for sure, and don't eat so much meat. I mean, those would have been.
That one was in there. Well,
so is wind.
Yeah,
those two were in there, but the solar wasn't, oddly enough, and EVs were not.
And where did EVs fall? Pretty far down the line.
They fell pretty far down the line. And the reason for this is really the modeling, which is more and more people are going to be involved with transport.
Sure.
I mean, they want transport, whether they own it or whether they use it in terms of ride sharing.
Sure. I want to talk about that too.
And so you have increases in the efficiency if you move from internal combustion engines to EVs, and big reduction in emissions if the electric vehicles are powered by renewable energy. However, you have more and more people basically wanting to have have mobility.
Sure.
And so we have to factor that in. So it sort of canceled out some of the savings that you would expect from EVs versus ICEs. And people also have to understand that there's a big carbon footprint from even making the darn car. You know what I mean? It's not like, the copper mines for the copper and the steel and whatever it is, even the carbon fiber, if it's a carbon fiber car. So, we did the math and we did it properly. We had subtraction signs. So it wasn't just what it could do, but also what impact would it have in so doing.
So one of the other surprises to me was food, and particularly 3 out of the top solutions were related to food. So food waste, plant-based diet, and refrigeration.
Well, silvopasture, really.
Yeah. And that too, actually, 4,
Yeah. Well, food surprised us too. It's a number 1 sector. If we have
it's huge. Well, everyone eats every day too.
I mean, it was like under our nose, literally. That's not an analogy. Food is number 1 for 2 reasons. One is it collectively is the largest source of emissions. I mean, because you have liquid fuel, you have diesel, you have nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. You have methane emissions, enteric emissions from ruminants, cows, cattle, plus, you have then emissions from the tillage, from CO2. So you put all that together, and then you put in food waste as well. And once again, you have food that had this big footprint being just thrown away. 40% of U.S. food is thrown away and discarded. And that most of it goes into landfills and becomes anaerobic. And once you have organic waste in an anaerobic environment, you have methanogenesis, which is a bacteria that produces methane. And so, and that's 34 times more powerful than CO2. You start adding all this up and you realize that food is an enormous source of emissions. However, at the same time, when you go to regenerative agriculture and agroforestry and different types of agricultural practices, including intensive managed grazing and things like that, you're actually sequestering carbon. In other words, you're bringing it back down and putting it in the soil or in the biomass in the case of silvopasture. And so food does two things. Both you stop emitting, but you also bring it back down. So it's a twofer.
What I love too about what you've said about food is there's some easy takeaways for people listening. Where it's like, one, you're not saying you have to go vegan tomorrow. Just eat a more plant-based diet. Like, just talk to people. Like, food. Not everyone can go buy a hybrid, even though that doesn't have necessarily the impact we want. But like food, I make daily choices.
Yes.
Numerous times a day. So for the average person listening, like, how can they apply?
Two things. One is reduce your protein content to 50, 55 grams. Past that, it's not good for you, and it certainly isn't good for the planet. Choose your proteins wisely, and knowing that CAFOs, confined area feeding operations, for cows and pigs and chickens for that matter, are a larger source of emissions than every truck, car, bus, ship in the world, a train. In other words, it's bigger than transport in terms of
grass-fed, pasture, all that.
Yeah. So if you're going to eat animal food, okay, fine. Where did the egg come from? Where did the chicken come from? Where did the pork come from? If you eat pork, and if you don't, that's fine. Your choice, but reduce how much you eat. And then the other thing is, do not throw anything away.
Yep.
And for me, this has been a real lesson, because I always felt like, never good about not finishing my meal or throwing something away. But when we did the math, I just realized, oh my gosh, the biggest one, it's number 3 in terms of impact. But it's actually larger than that, because we couldn't measure the methane emissions from landfill food because the data was too sparse around the world. And these are global data we're measuring. But when you throw that in, food waste is easily surpassing wind and refrigerant management as the number one solution. But the way to not waste is to eat what you buy, what you order. And if you don't eat it, then you're not giving feedback. If you have to eat because you over-ordered, that's how you learn not to over-order.
Yep.
If you take too much and eat it, and you don't feel good because I ate too much, good. You'll be really careful the next meal. And so the way to stop wasting food is to actually practice it. And when you practice it, then it changes how much you buy, what you buy, in terms of, just how much really.
Sure.
And it changes what you do at home, what you do in the refrigerator. Refrigerators are a place where food goes to die for a lot of people. So if you have a green composting thing in your city, that's great. There should be no food in it whatsoever.
Sure. I love that. So simple. That is one take for everyone listening. Everyone can do that.
Yeah.
Eat less food, eat less protein. You don't have to go vegan. You don't have to change your lifestyle dramatically. Just make sure you're actually eating the food you buy, and don't eat a ton of protein, and make sure you know where it's from.
Yeah.
Really easy, basic stuff can change the world right there.
Right. Absolutely. And to know that, broccoli has as much protein as beef. To know your sources of protein so that you don't feel deprived when you're eating seeds and nuts and, broccoli and there's protein in so many of our foods. Right. And to get rid of that wiring that somehow there has to be a slab of meat or, a plate full of eggs or whatever in order for you to be sufficient. Look at there's O positive, there's different blood types. Some people need more protein than others.
In the age of personalization, DNA, what works for me may not work for you.
Exactly. You have to figure it out what works for you. But at the same time, bend it towards the sacred.
Sure. So something else I really loved in the book and really blew people away at Revitalize when you spoke, women and education.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
People are like, whoa, what do you have? Women in education, climate change?
I know. Isn't that interesting that all these years, as I said, nobody ever just did what we did, which is to, map, measure, and model the top solutions. But
I feel like over the years, people just complained.
Well, what they complained.
It scared people.
Well, what they did is try to make it simple. And they would say, like Al Gore to this day, they would say wind, solar, EVs, and don't eat so many burgers and stop cutting trees. All very, very important solutions, but there was this sort of implication that if we did all 4 or 5 of those, that we would get a hall pass to the 22nd century.
But also, what do you do with that? If I'm middle class in the middle of the country where I'm like, okay, solar's out, wind's out, hybrids out, well, what do I do? Okay.
Well, what it does is make you feel like, well, I'm not in the tropics. I'm not cutting tropical trees. So I'm out. I can't put up wind turbines. I could put them on my garage, solar panels, but I can't do solar farms. I can't do utility-based solar. It actually leaves people out.
Sure.
And yeah, I can eat less burgers. I mean, that's okay. But, it actually, what it does is make people think, well, I hope they do it.
Right.
And rather than it's us.
Well, in some ways it becomes like an elitist thing, which is like a problem with politics and
everything.
Yeah.
It's them, other, me, I'm just a good citizen doing my, paying my mortgage and going to work and sending the kids to school. And so it's very exclusionary in that sense, not intentionally by anybody, but it's also scientifically not true.
Right.
In other words, if we did those 4 or 5 things as intended, we would still go right over the cliff of climate change.
And so back to women in education, fascinating.
So yeah, I mean, I was the one who actually put it in there as a potential solution, and it got pushed back by my researchers saying, wah, wah, wah. And I had this wonderful person on our staff, Catherine Wilkinson, a Rhodes Scholar, got her PhD at Oxford from Atlanta, who really, women's studies is her specialty. She wrote a book called God and Green for her thesis at Oxford. And she said, oh yeah, I'll do the research. Because my research staff said, there's no research to support that. And she did it, and boom, here. And basically, when there's about 60 million girls, that are pulled out of education, pulled out of school because of family traditions, early marriage. They go to work to support their brother's education. It could be, like I say, religious. There's lots of reasons that are given to not educate girls properly. But if they're supported and encouraged by their family and their village and the community to basically go through school to matriculate to what we would call a high school degree, they become a woman on their terms rather than somebody else's terms, or at least more on their terms. And they're better educated, they earn more, and they make very different life choices than women who are girls, frankly, who are basically told what to do at a very early age. And they have about 2+ children. The girl who was yanked out of school on the average has 5+. So girls' education has just so many beneficial impacts. We measured just the climate one. We did speak to the other impacts, which are obvious, I think. But in that impact is the difference between the UN high and median population projections for 2050. Mm-hmm. And the UN is very clear that that's due overwhelmingly to family planning. And so number 6 is girls' education, which is one pathway to family planning. And number 7 is family planning, which is clinics available to women all over the world to monitor and plan their families and to support their reproductive well-being and health. And two together, if you combine them, are the number one solution, not refrigerants or wind.
Wow.
It's women. It's so funny because when I was at UC Santa Cruz, I said just what I said to you right now. And I got a question afterwards said, yeah, but how do we control population? We have to control population, you know? And I said, you do that by losing the verb, control. I said, the verb is empower.
Love that.
Not empower women, empower girls. And they'll take care of it. They know what to do. But when you control them, you know, you have the system that caused the problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what do you think has changed? Earlier in our conversation, you know, in some ways you reviewed the enemy of big business. And if we fast forward to today, you know, there are people like Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever, who loves you, and John Zimmer, the CEO of Lyft. Like, these are big guys. Like, we could go on and on a list of people, like really innovators in business. Unilever's a massive, massive company. And they're listening.
Yeah.
So what do you think
happened?
Yeah. And what is it special about these people? And what do you think's going on? Like, do you think it's because it's just so clear this is fucked up? And do you think these are entrepreneurs who are a little bit more conscious, who understand what's going on? a little bit more? Like, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think happened? And what's
Literacy,
special about these people? And
I think literacy. I
yeah,
mean, look at some CEOs are not so literate, but, but I think a new generation as well, but, became brought up in literacy about the environment, about climate, about social responsibility, about the impacts environment's having on people, and vice versa, what people having on the environment, and decided they wanted a life of meaning as opposed to a life of just materialism, and dedicated themselves, their services, their products, or in the case of Paul Pullman, so people who took over companies that as CEO and then changed their underlying ethos with respect to environment and people in the future. I mean, any business that isn't really investing in the future is going to fail, and
right,
so the future is writ large, and those who see it do well, and those who don't fail. And you say, well, no, the Koch brothers are, don't see the future and they're getting richer every day. For sure, in the oil and gas, particularly, it's an oligarchy, it's a kleptocracy of sorts. But overall, what you're seeing is a real change. I mean, Walmart.
sure,
I mean, come on. Now I'm not saying there should be Walmarts at all. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying is that their goals are very, very different today than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And they include 100% renewable energy. And
which is a big deal.
and it's a big deal. And zero waste, which is a big deal, and so forth. And I don't necessarily think that they're going to be, the store I shop at, but, that's okay. The point is that people stopped and then started to point towards north, and the true north in a way. And the rate at which they go there depends on the size and their commitment, their shareholders, and who started it. If it's an entrepreneur, it's a lot easier than if it's somebody who's slotted into the CEO position. But yeah, I mean, you're seeing Norway, who makes all their money, from oil, basically have these huge pension funds, which are divesting of oil.
Right.
You get this sort of interesting. They get it. They understand it. They're not shutting down their oil wells in the North Sea, but they are definitely not investing in coal, gas, and oil, And you have Oslo saying that there's no ICEs, no internal combustion engines allowed in Oslo past 24, I forget what date it is, but you can't drive into Oslo if you have a car run by diesel or gas.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what is it? So we talked about CEOs. Like they're just. I meet people all the time. I mentioned I met this great environmental artist, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love Paul Hawken." Our friend Giselle. Like all these amazing people. They're like, "Oh, we love Paul Hawken." Like, what do you? I know it's a little bit hard for you to be introspective, and it is for most people. Like, what do you think it is about you and this message where so many people are just, for lack of a better, they love you. They love you. They love Drawdown. They love the message.
Well, I think they love the message. Yeah. I mean, they don't know me.
Well, some of them do, and
yeah, some of them do.
Yeah.
I think it's about waking up,
Sure.
and then when you wake up to something, you orient it's like recognize. That's what recognize means, to know again something that's inside you. So when you see or hear or read something, you are actually, something in you that you innately know comes to the fore.
Right.
And you're really grateful to that message or that book or that person or whatever it was that allowed you to see yourself.
Mm.
And I got, I don't forget from which audience, but I got standing ovation before I started a speech. And I thought, And so this is interesting. But what I was saying is and afterwards too, I said, what you're applauding is this recognition. You're actually, I wasn't trying to fend it off so much as what I was saying is what we're doing here is applauding what we know, all of us know and feel and are dedicated to, as human beings. And that's a good thing. It's not like you, that person standing up there. I mean, obviously, if you don't deliver the message in a way that's credible and humble and kind, or, not didactic
Mm-hmm.
and stentorian, people can hear it. And the nice thing about Drawdown for me as a speaker is that it's not my belief.
You're just the guy
I'm
telling you
presenting.
how it is.
Well, we had 200 plus people work together to come up with what we know, we being all of us together collectively on Earth. And the plan that is on the cover of the book is our plan. Humanity has a plan. It just didn't see it before. It's collective. That there is this sort of brilliance and insight and beauty in humanity that is basically excluded by and occluded by the media and by the stories and by everything we read. Almost everything we read is about trying to get our adrenal glands worked up, fear, anger, and it works, shaming works, fear works,
But
threat
if there's
works.
no plan.
But underneath all that, there is a humanity that's deeply, deeply committed and caring. And that's the message that we are trying to convey. And I think when you convey that message, people will laud you, praise you, say they love you. But actually what they love is
The message.
what's in themselves that corresponds to that.
Do you think, certainly I believe this, that Trump is so bad on climate change that he's woken a lot of people up? That combined with all the shit that's going on every day in the world with natural disasters.
Yeah, I think he pulled out a Paris Agreement. 100 million people in America, I'm just guessing, didn't know what it existed.
And now they know.
Yeah, now they know. And so in a bizarre way, he actually increased the awareness of it.
Or the national parks, what he's doing now. It's like, whoa, what?
Yeah, he's doing things that kind of winding a spring that's going to...
You see Patagonia, REI, big business. It's like, it's just so egregious. It's hard. I say you have to be almost unconscious not to.
Yeah, I mean, what he's doing is classically gaslighting. He's the gaslighter in chief. Basically, he's abusively treating the American people and American Commonwealth, with lies. And that's going to go so far, and then it's going to be a real pushback.
Something I've thought, even though I'm 43, so I didn't participate in the civil rights movement. I was a little young for that. I've drawn comparisons. It's my gut feeling that this movement, that whether it's there's definitely something happening right now in America. Is it drawing your experience with civil rights, different movement, different implications, but are there similarities with what's going on now in America and all the things, whether it's climate change, Me Too, like there's so much shit. Are we in a similar?
Well, I think what you can say is that what's emblematic of this time is that all the stuff we weren't talking about is coming out. The stuff we were ignoring is not ignorable. The stuff that we had done to others is now coming to the fore. The darkness that was in the American soul is evident. The anger and of American people at being sort of feeling left behind, left out, marginalized is also coming out. All this is coming out in a relatively short time. And so it looks bleak in that sense, but actually it's a really good thing because it's out there and we can see it and have that conversation and have the discussion and vote and campaign and march and resist and organize. And that's what's happening. But I don't think that we should project that on the world, though, which is oftentimes people think somehow we're the world. We're not. And we just act that way. And the rest of the world, is very different. I mean, I got sent a photograph of the One Earth Summit, in Paris that Macron convened, and it was a picture of him sitting in the palace, wherever this meeting was, with Bill Gates and Mayor Bloomberg and Richard Branson and others, with a copy of Drawdown in front of him. And it was like, I just think that we have to be careful not to imbibe too much poison, too much toxicity, recognize it, see it, and then use it as a way to inspire, to move, to motivate, and to act, but not to get, not to become
Sure.
tarred by it, you know.
So it seems like in this past year, with regards to climate change and effects in the U.S. and whether it's Puerto Rico, Houston, fires in California, it would just they come, they go, they come back. It just does that make you less optimistic? Does that make you, does it give you a sense of urgency, or is it?
Well, it does.
How do you feel when you see it's like, oh shit?
Well, it does give a sense of urgency. The way I look at it is this way, which is that the IPCC, the science, is the best problem statement any group of scientists have ever come up with in human history. Okay, number one. Number two is that the headlines and the actuality of Cat 5 hurricanes in Puerto Rico and the Irma in Houston and the fires in Southern California and the snow in Louisiana last week and so on, all these things correspond to basically validate the science and correspond to it. Say, yep, they got that problem statement absolutely right, because these things were predicted a long time ago as the outcome of global warming. And so rather than seeing the validation, the headlines themselves as a burden, like, oh my gosh, to me, it's actually an opening. Because what I think is going to happen, and we see it in the Me Too movement now, we saw it in LGBT rights movement starting, who knows when it started,
Sure.
But there was an inflection point between 2010 and 12. And that what we're going to see the same thing with climate, which is that because of extreme weather events, which are not necessarily caused by global warming, but the conditions change in which normal events, fire ecology is normal in the West,
Sure.
It's not unusual, usually not caused by homeless encampment, in a park, but rather by lightning. But nevertheless, fire ecology is actually helpful, for the West, for seer environments, and always has happened. But when you see the conditions, of low humidity and,
Right.
in a hydrologic cycle that's gone haywire in California, drought, too much rain last year, too much growth, and then, having 106-degree temperature in San Francisco, I mean, it's, and then you get this new growth just completely drying out, and 1-2% humidity, which is unheard of in December in Southern California. And then you get just somebody screwing up,
Sure.
with a campfire, and you get a Holocaust, you get an inferno. So these things, as they mount up, I think are going to also cause this sort of tipping point, this point, again, on the asymptote, of realization, awareness, where whatever people's disengagement or disbelief or denial might have been prior to that, it's over. They got it.
Right.
And they're going to want to say, let's do something. Why? What are you doing? What aren't you doing? And this thing of like Senator Imhoff throwing snowballs on the Senate floor will be looked back in history as gross,
Right.
Misbehavior and ignorance.
So Drawdown is a long-term plan, and we are all cautiously optimistic. But in the short term, say 3 years from now, where do you hope we'll be?
I don't hope. I actually am not interested in hope whatsoever.
I love that. Explain why.
Well, it's my Buddhist training. Hope is the sort of the pretty mask of fear. In other words, there's nothing to hope for unless you have fear. Why would you hope for something? Well, because you hope something does happen as opposed to, or doesn't. Well, it depends what you're hoping for. But underneath that is fear. And what we need to be is fearless right now, not hopeful. Fearlessness is what we need to be, and just absolutely truth to power and act, and not be, in a sense, intimidated by what we think is going to happen and what we believe, or to succor ourselves, with hope. I find hopefulness kind of a mind killer in some way.
So from the early part of that explanation, referencing your Buddhist beliefs, now I know why you're good friends with Stephen Mitchell and Byron Katie.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've come full circle. Now I know.
Yeah.
So what keeps you up at night, and what has you excited in the morning?
If I get a little bit sort of overamped and adrenalized, anything would keep me up at night. I mean, my cortisol levels spike, and no matter what I think about, I get anxious. I think the thing that makes me most anxious is that I'm not doing enough, that I'm wasting my time on certain things. That I need to plan better and to be a better money raiser. So there's more people and better delegation. And so what I really want to do is go back to researching and writing a lot more to come. And so that keeps me up at night, thinking I'm not doing a good enough job. Yeah.
What has you excited in the morning?
Excited? The morning. I live in. It's like an amazing thing to wake up. I mean, we lose the sense that it's a miracle. We are a walking miracle, that it's a miracle to be alive, And when you go so fast, you don't remember that you breathe and that there's air and that, in a few minutes you're gone and that you breathe without thought. It happens automatically. And the extraordinary way that our body transforms food, it's just, and where it comes from and who did it and how far away it came and, just all the care and love that's in that, and we take it for granted. And for me, my first child, I delivered the child at home. And I think I have to say, I never understood what sex was until I delivered a baby. I don't say didn't understand how to do it, or how to enjoy it. I mean, I never really understood it. And then, just like a circle was completed, like I'm not saying that the outcome of sex should be procreation. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying is the cycle of life, and the fact that this extraordinary organism, this human being, this came out, from this mother, alive and perfect and extraordinary, and and so many ways. So the morning is really about the sunshine and the birds and where I live, anyway, and just like, look, I remember my daughter when she was 2 years old, and I would take her out in night, in my arms, and she would point up and she'd say, Papa, Papa, look at the moon and the stars. Look at the moon and the stars, And for her, it was just astonishing that there was the moon and the stars in the sky. Every single night she was astonished. And her name Anastasia means the one who's been reborn, and I think of that Emerson quote, which is in Blessed Unrest. I guess it's not a Blessed Unrest. It was in it's not true, a commencement speech I gave, but he said, what would we do if the stars came out only once every 1,000 years?
Right.
What would we do that night? And I said, he didn't answer the question, but I'm pretty sure we'd stay up all night. Pretty sure we would celebrate, be joyous. We would dance. We'd probably create new children that night. We'd probably create new religions. I mean, it would just be an extraordinary event in the history of humanity. And instead, they come out every night and we watch television and do social media. So the morning for me is really about literally an awakening, which I think we fall asleep during the day when we're awake, because we get so engaged and so busy and so stressed and wanting to be better and perfect and answer and respond and do everything we're expected to, both as family people, as partners, as workers, etc. All the things that we do. And actually, in a way, we fall asleep. And so
sleepwalking through life.
Through life. And so we wake up in the morning, or not. Right. And it's up to you. It's a choice.
So you meet so many amazing people, whether they're titans of industry, passionate activists. Who inspires you?
The people inspire me tend to be writers, actually. You mentioned Stephen Mitchell. That's one. Barry Lopez. Amazing human being and writer. Arctic Dreams of Wolves of Men. David James Duncan. Another writer. I'm naming men because I'm a guy, and I actually I want to be a better guy. And actually, men that I can look up to and learn from and be reminded
Hmm.
of what a better guy looks like, talks like, does like, walks like. I mean, is the most inspiring thing to me. It's not that women are extraordinary. I mean, we talked about Byron Katie and are maybe the foremost teachers, I think, right now on the planet are actually women, not men. I really believe that. So, but in terms of inspiring me, to be a better person, it's largely men like that. Alec Webb. I mean, I have these male friends, and I look at them as exemplars, that teach me that I'm vastly imperfect and that the answer isn't perfection, but the answer is self-reflection.
Right. So if you could go back in time, just the last question, and give advice to 20-something Paul Hawken, what would that advice be?
Don't get distracted. And learn. It's funny because what is a distraction? And to me, when I look back at things that I did that at the time, I would say, well, you really didn't have to do that. Actually, I learned a lot. I had jobs that were, when I grew up, that were kind of like whatever. But now I look back and say, no, I actually learned a lot from doing that. I was a plumber, I was a contractor, I was a carpenter. I sold Christmas trees. I worked in a gold mine. I mean, placer
You worked
mine.
in a gold mine?
A placer mine, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can keep going. I mean, worked in a restaurant. I was a dishwasher when I was 12. I mean, I look back on those things and realize that actually they were very helpful. But at the same time, I think you get to a stage in your life, in your 20s and 30s, where it's easy to be distracted.
Sure.
By today's social media.
Oh God, today is just
music can be a distraction. Just the constancy of the noise, the sound. And, maybe it's a great tune, but your brain is then processing two things.
Sure.
Is that really the best way to treat your brain? Friends, so-called friends.
Right.
And in other words, to really be able to say, "This is a friend. This is not somebody I want to spend time with." No judgment. Just that's my decision.
Right.
And to not be pulled in by socializing, but that doesn't mean to not develop your social intelligence. So, again,
Sure.
It's not, and to honor yourself. Some people are gregarious and extroverted and extraordinary. Some people I'm very introverted. I'm a monk, actually. I mean, I like to be alone. I like to spend a lot of time alone, and to really honor that instead of trying to be somebody else, that the world expects, And, I talk to people who are doing public speaking and they're nervous, like their first speech, or, they're going, oh my God, I just feel I'm dying every day before this speech, And I said, well, I asked them, who do you think people want to hear when you go up to the podium? And they kind of look around. I said, there's only one thing they want. They just want you, nobody else.
Right.
You don't have to be anybody else. You don't have to succeed because that's in your mind. They just want you to show up. And so I think the distraction that we all have is to not really show up.
Right.
Is to try to be, see, do, say something that is going to accommodate or please or, a situation or somebody. And that's not showing up.
I have a new career for you. Paul Hawken, life coach.
I have a new request. I need one.
Paul, thank you so much for being here. It is an honor to have you. Everyone listening, you must pick up Drawdown, non-negotiable. Check out his Revitalized talk. Must.
Jason, thank you. And thank you, everyone here at Mind Body Green, for what you stand for, what you do, what you extend out into the world, the way you do it. It's such for me, it's like a refuge in the way I'm, and when I get the dailies, I just feel like it's.
I love it. You subscribe to the newsletter.
I subscribe to the newsletter.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Jason.
I want to take a moment to invite you into our Mind Body Green ecosystem, where you can explore the infinite possibilities of health and well-being. All you have to do is click the subscribe button to hear more thought-provoking interviews with leaders in the health space. I am so grateful for all of you who have tuned in over the years, and let me tell you, it's only going to get better.